Commercially available cell phones were introduced onto the market in 1983 with zero safety testing. Because what could go wrong? The first testing came in the early 90s, triggered by a lawsuit claiming cell phone radiation was responsible for the death of an early user. Dozens of studies, mainly paid for by telecom companies, were launched. The results were troubling. Even the head of the Wireless Technology Research Report, which paid for many of these studies, eventually concluded that the evidence showed an increased risk of brain tumors. This led to that man's credibility being attacked by the industry that hired him. When in doubt, shoot the messenger. Early studies were used by FCC after the fact to set safety standards in the late 1990s for this technology, standards that remain the same today despite radical changes in the technology. It's kind of like the FAA using studies on the Wright brothers plane to establish safety standards for modern jets. In 1991, second-generation broadband cellular networks, or 2G, were introduced, which allowed for data services, including texting and limited internet access. 3G, which allowed for expanded mobile internet access, fixed wireless internet access, video calls, and mobile TV technologies, was released in 2001. 4G followed in 2008, allowing data speeds up to 1 gigabyte per second. 5G networks, which use closely spaced small cell towers to provide nearly universal coverage and exposure, are currently being built out. Each generation is characterized by new frequency bands, higher data rates, increased radiation exposure, and greater risk. 5 generations in, and no one has demonstrated that the technology is even safe. So we don't know how bad it will get, but we know how bad it has been. Since 1990, more than 500 studies have found harmful biologic or health effects from exposure, though the industry, following the tobacco industry playbook, uses selective studies to muddy the water. The industry hires scientists to conduct research, and they mostly find cell phones are safe. Private studies mostly find that cell phones cause harm. 67% of independent studies have found a biological effect from these technologies. Only 28% of industry-funded studies have. Houston, we have a problem. But the biggest study is ongoing. Since safety hasn't ever been established, we are the experiment that will decide. Early studies looked at 30 to 60 minutes of exposure. Now we average over 5.5 hours on cell phones every day. And with 5G being unleashed with no safety testing and cell towers positioned nearly everywhere, that exposure is going to eventually be nearly constant and with higher concentrations. We are all in the microwave, and the temperature is being ratcheted up. Much like tobacco companies, telecoms are betting that if they are wrong, the money they make now will outweigh the cost of lawsuits for wrongful death that will come later. And whether you know it or not, you are that bet.